When you hear the word au pair, you probably imagine cozy homes, smiling children, and a chance to live out a cultural dream. But what if I told you that behind some of these innocent doors lurk horrors far darker than anything you could ever imagine? Imagine tucking a child into bed, only to wake up with that same child standing over you in the shadows, clutching a kitchen knife. Picture falling for a charming stranger who seems to know everything about you until you discover he has been stalking your every move for months, collecting your secrets like trophies. Or stepping off a plane in a foreign country, thinking you're about to meet a kind family, only to realize you're seconds away from being abducted and trafficked. These are not stories from movies. These are real nightmares that happen to young women who only wanted to experience life abroad. If you think the suburbs are safe, if you think smiling faces always mean kindness, think again. Welcome to The Price Paid, where we uncover the true cost of trust. Subscribe now and brace yourself for 3 disturbing au pair horror stories you will never forget. I was only 20 years old when I boarded a flight across the Atlantic, leaving my small French town behind to begin what I believed would be the most exciting adventure of my life. Becoming an au pair in America sounded glamorous. A chance to grow up, learn, and prove that I was capable of independence. I told myself it would be like a movie. Polished neighborhoods, well-behaved children, happy family dinners, maybe even friendships that would last forever. I was naive enough to believe that in a wealthy suburb, surrounded by picket fences and quiet streets, nothing truly bad could ever happen. I could not have been more wrong. The Joseph family seemed ordinary at first. The parents, Mr. and Mrs. Joseph, were both professionals, always busy, always on the move. Their house looked like something pulled straight out of a real estate brochure manicured lawn. Neat shutters, a backyard so large you could get lost in it. They had 2 sons, Brock, who was 12, and Brandon, who was 9. At first glance, Brock was the typical preteen, lazy with chores, obsessed with video games, and sometimes a little disrespectful, but nothing that stood out as unusual. Brandon, on the other hand, was different. He carried an energy that unsettled me from the moment I met him. There was a strange stillness in his eyes, a kind of calculation that didn't belong on a child's face. When I introduced myself, he stared at me, not shy, not curious, but studying me as if I were a puzzle. His first words were, "Are you the maid?" And when I laughed, trying to break the tension, he didn't laugh with me. He just kept watching. The parents had warned me that Brandon had an attitude problem, but what they described as misbehavior was something far more disturbing. He lied constantly, with ease and conviction. He told neighbors his parents locked him in closets, teachers that his brother tried to strangle him, and once he told me in a chilling monotone that the last au pair had run away and was never seen again. When I scolded him for making up such cruel stories, his expression shifted, his eyes narrowed, and with a voice that carried an unsettling authority, he told me, "Don't tell me what to do." I laughed nervously then. But deep down, I felt the first spark of fear. It did not take long for Brandon's behavior to escalate. 2 months into my stay, I pulled back my bed covers one evening and froze. Hundreds of tiny silver points glistened in the dim light. Thumbtacks dozens, maybe 100 of them had been carefully scattered across my mattress, all pointing upward. My heart slammed against my ribs. Had I not noticed, I would have laid down on them, felt those sharp points drive into my skin. As I removed them, I realized the fabric of my sheets was riddled with small punctures, proof of his careful planning. Earlier that day, I had caught him spying through the crack of my bedroom door. I had assumed he was being childish. Now, I wondered if he had been watching to see when I discovered his trap. The thought chilled me more than the thumbtacks themselves. I didn't tell the parents. I was afraid they would dismiss me, or worse, decide I wasn't suited for the job and send me back to France in shame. So I locked it away in silence, telling myself I could manage. But the house was changing. I began to notice Brandon watching me constantly. He would sit quietly in corners, eyes fixed on me without blinking. Sometimes I would be cooking and glance up to find him in the doorway, unmoving, his stare heavy as if he were daring me to acknowledge him. I avoided him as much as I could, retreating to my locked room at night. One afternoon, while watering the flowers in the backyard, I noticed a patch of soil that looked freshly disturbed. A sour, rotting odor floated from it, strong enough to make me gag. I knelt down and dug into the earth with a small garden spade, my curiosity quickly turning to horror. Beneath the surface were the stiff bodies of 3 dead rabbits, their fur matted, their limbs twisted unnaturally. One had its legs bound tightly with string. My stomach lurched, and I ran to the Josephs to tell them what I had found. They listened with polite concern, but when they questioned Brandon, he simply shrugged, wide-eyed and innocent, insisting it wasn't him. Joseph told me it was probably neighborhood kids playing a cruel prank. Then she dismissed the subject. My voice, my fear, meant nothing compared to Brandon's blank stare. After that discovery, I began locking my door at night. I was restless, always listening for noises, always aware that Brandon's presence lingered just beyond the walls. My fears were confirmed one night when I awoke to the sound of shuffling in my room. In the faint light from the hallway, I saw his silhouette standing at the edge of my bed. In his hand glinted the unmistakable outline of a kitchen knife. A scream ripped out of me before I could think, and within moments the parents rushed in. But by then the knife had vanished. Brandon claimed he was sleepwalking. When I pointed out the knife's handle sticking out from beneath my bed, mister, Joseph retrieved it, and Brandon simply smiled and said, "I've never seen that before." To my disbelief, his parents accepted his story. Their looks told me I was being dramatic, that I was making trouble where there was none. I felt completely isolated, a prisoner in a house that refused to protect me. The final blow came the next morning. Mrs. Joseph summoned me into the living room, holding a pearl necklace in one hand and my purse in the other. She claimed she had found the necklace inside, accusing me of theft. My words of denial fell flat. Brandon stood in the hallway, smiling faintly, his eyes locked on mine as though savoring his victory. In that moment, I knew he had planted it. I knew he wanted me gone. And the worst part was, his parents believed him without question. They fired me on the spot. By the following day, I was on a plane back to France, my dream shattered. For months, I sank into depression, haunted by Brandon's face, by the sense of injustice, by the terrifying realization that a 9-year-old child had dismantled my life piece by piece. I had gone to America for adventure, for growth, and instead I returned broken, humiliated, and deeply afraid of what kind of man Brandon would one day become. Sometimes, even now, I wake in the night and think of his cold, watchful stare, and I wonder what horrors he is capable of as an adult. The thought chills me more than anything else. The evil was already there, alive and growing inside him, long before he was old enough to be called a man. When I first decided to leave my small German village to become an au pair in California, I thought my biggest challenges would be homesickness or struggling with American slang. I never imagined the real threat would come wrapped in charm, sophistication, and the kind of attention that seemed flattering at first. Looking back, I know now that predators do not always wear masks of violence. Sometimes they smile at you across a crowded bar. It started on a Tuesday night. My best friend Jennifer and I were at our favorite spot near the college campus, a bar buzzing with music and laughter. The room smelled of cheap beer and perfume, sticky floors packed with students who moved as if tomorrow's responsibilities didn't exist. I was waiting for drinks when a tall young man with curly brown hair approached me. His first words were not a cliche pickup line, but a sharp observation. "You're German, aren't you?" Most people guessed vaguely European, so his accuracy caught me off guard. When I confirmed, he smiled, introduced himself as Sebi, and started talking about German culture with a surprising amount of detail. He mentioned small facts about cities and food that few Americans ever seem to know. His intelligence and curiosity made me feel seen in a way that was rare. We talked for what felt like hours. His words flowed easily, his humor subtle, his attention fixed on me as if no one else in the bar existed. For once, I didn't feel like a novelty, a foreign girl to be shown off, but rather a person worth listening to. By the time he introduced his friend Hunter, who quickly hit it off with Jennifer, I felt comfortable enough to give him my number without hesitation. It seemed harmless. It seemed exciting. A few days later, he invited me to his apartment for dinner. I expected a casual date, maybe a restaurant reservation, but instead he was cooking for me in his kitchen. He uncorked a bottle of wine, played quiet music, and treated me like I was the only person in the world who mattered. It was thoughtful, even sweet, and after the evening ended, I stayed the night. In the morning, I noticed his apartment was unusually tidy for a college student. The walls were decorated not with posters or sports memorabilia, but with black and white photographs of landscapes. Dozens of them. Every image was from Germany. At first, I laughed at the coincidence, but then I realized some of them were shockingly familiar. One in particular made my stomach drop. It was an aerial shot of my village, the very place I had grown up. I pointed it out, and he acted delighted by the crazy coincidence. At the time, I brushed it off as fate, some strange sign that we were meant to meet. Now, I see it for what it was, a carefully constructed web. Over the next few weeks, we spent more time together. We went to parties, out to dinner, even simple walks. He was attentive, always making sure I felt safe and cared for. My friends liked him too. Jennifer told me more than once that I was lucky to find a guy who seemed so invested. But then small things began to feel off. At a restaurant one night, he ordered vegetarian options for me before I had a chance to say anything. When I asked how he knew I was vegetarian, he said he'd seen it on my Instagram. At first I laughed, but later I realized the post he referred to was years old, buried under dozens of updates. For him to have found it, he would have had to scroll endlessly, combing through my digital history. That was the first time a ripple of unease ran through me. It grew worse when I stayed over again. While Sebi slept beside me, his phone lit up with a notification. Something inside me told me to look, and though I knew it was a violation, curiosity won. I unlocked his phone with the password I had memorized and went into his photo gallery. What I found froze me to the bone. There was a folder titled Wife. Inside were screenshots of my social media dating back months, maybe longer. Old captions, tagged locations, even images I barely remembered posting. He had downloaded them all, preserved them like artifacts. In his notes app, there were translations of my posts into English, detailed observations of my schedule, guesses about my habits. My blood ran cold when I found a photograph of my driver's licensee, one I had lost during a chaotic night at a frat party months before. Suddenly, everything made sense. He hadn't stumbled into my life by coincidence. He had chosen me, studied me, hunted me. Shaking, I closed the phone and quietly gathered my things. I slipped out into the night, heart pounding, too afraid to confront him, too horrified to think straight. I didn't even take screenshots for evidence, something I regret bitterly now. The whole ride back to my host family's house, my hands trembled. Germans value privacy more than anything, and here was a stranger who had stolen mine completely. My profile had been private.
Oh no,
my posts were old. But with my ID, he had pieced together everything where I lived, what I liked, even the small village I called home. I barely slept that night, certain he would appear at my door. In the morning, my phone buzzed endlessly with messages from him. He asked why I left, if I had looked through his phone, begging me to talk. I sent one final message. If he ever contacted me again, I would call the police. Then I blocked him on every platform. For days, I jumped at shadows, terrified of seeing his face again. But the nightmare was not over. Weeks later, I began noticing a silver car parked across the street from my host family's house. It drove slowly up and down, sometimes idling for long stretches. New messages came from unfamiliar numbers, fake Instagram accounts, each one asking the same thing. Can we talk? I ignored them all, but the fear burrowed deeper. My contract was ending soon, and I told myself I could endure until then. I locked my accounts, told my closest friends to stop tagging me in public posts, and prayed he would lose interest. But deep down, I knew he wouldn't. People like Sebi don't simply stop, they escalate. They push boundaries until there's nothing left to take. Every time I saw headlights sweep past the window at night, I wondered if it was him, waiting, planning. I thought about the word wife scrawled across that folder, and the obsessive details he had collected about me. This wasn't love. It wasn't even obsession. It was ownership. He believed I belonged to him, a possession to claim. Now, whenever I tell this story, people ask why I didn't go to the police immediately. The truth is, I didn't believe they would take me seriously. I was a foreigner, a temporary guest in the country. To them, maybe it would have sounded like paranoia, like a girl exaggerating because she regretted a relationship. But I know what I saw. I know what he planned. And to this day, I still wonder what might have happened if I had stayed asleep that night, never picking up his phone, never realizing the danger lurking behind his perfect smile. When I was a child growing up in Canada, my dream was always to live in Europe. Paris, with its lights and language, had lived in my imagination for as long as I could remember. I studied French in high school, practiced with friends, and told myself that one day I would walk the cobblestone streets and hear the sound of church bells echoing across the Seine. Becoming an au pair felt like the perfect opportunity and affordable way to immerse myself in French culture while working with children, something I had always loved. It seemed like the kind of adventure that could change my life. Instead, it nearly destroyed it. Unlike many other girls, I did not have family support. My background was complicated, my finances limited. While others paid for expensive agencies with careful vetting processes, I had no choice but to use a free au pair website. It felt risky, but I convinced myself it would be fine. After all, Thousands of families posted on those sites.
Your host mother was
Surely
never
most of them were
registered.
genuine. That is how I found Leah. Her profile was warm and inviting. She needed help caring for her 2 children while her husband traveled for work. Her messages were sweet, filled with pet names in French like Sherry and Ma Belle. She asked questions about me, how I handled children, what I thought of family life, but said little about herself. I found it a bit unusual, but not enough to raise alarms. I wanted so badly to believe in her kindness. There was one thing that nagged at me, though. Whenever I asked to see her children on video calls, there was always an excuse. They were at school, at a play date, or napping. She promised I would meet them the second I arrived. Something about it felt off, but the thought of adventure drowned out my doubts. She sent me an agreement that looked official enough, and I booked my ticket. My suitcase was small, my heart hopeful. I told myself I was ready. When I landed at Charles de Gaulle Airport, I expected Leah to be waiting with a sign or at least a smile. Instead, my phone buzzed with a message. She claimed she was stuck in traffic and that her cousin would pick me up. I hesitated, rereading the message several times with Google Translate to make sure I understood. My stomach twisted. Something about being met by a stranger felt wrong, but exhaustion from the long flight dulled my instincts. Soon a woman approached, smiling brightly. She was in her late 40s, with short blonde hair, friendly enough in appearance. "You must be Leah's au pair," she said. "I'm her cousin. She sent me to get you." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think Leah had simply been delayed, but when I asked to speak to Leah directly, my call went straight to voicemail. The woman brushed off my concern, saying Leah was probably still driving. She urged me to come with her, promising we would be at the house soon. I stood frozen for a long moment, weighing my options. The airport was buzzing with people, the loudspeaker echoing announcements I barely understood. I didn't know what else to do. Against my better judgment, I followed her to the car. At first, she kept up pleasant conversation, asking about my flight, my life in Canada, what I was most excited to see in France. But every time I asked about Leah or the children, her answers were vague. "You'll love them," she said again and again, never giving details. I watched the scenery change outside the window. At first, it matched the route on my map, but soon we veered away, heading into an area I did not recognize. The elegant suburbs gave way to warehouses, concrete, and empty industrial streets. My chest tightened. I told her we were going the wrong way, but she insisted it was a shortcut. Her tone was light, but her eyes flickered in the mirror with something colder. My hands began to shake. I demanded she take me back to the airport. She ignored me. I told her I would call the police. She laughed softly, as if I were being dramatic, and kept driving. Panic surged through me. My instincts screamed that I was in the process of being abducted. Every horror story I had ever heard about human trafficking exploded in my mind. I stared at the locked doors, the speed of the car, the unfamiliar streets. My breaths came shallow and quick. When the car slowed at an intersection, I made my choice. Without hesitation, I kicked the door open, tumbled onto the street, and scrambled to my feet. My palms stung from the asphalt, my suitcase still inside the car, but I didn't care. I ran to the sidewalk, heart hammering. The woman didn't drive off. She just sat there, staring at me, with a look I cannot describe, like I was a problem, like I had ruined her plan. Slowly, she pulled out her phone and began speaking rapidly, in a language I did not recognize. It wasn't French. It wasn't English. My stomach turned cold. Was she calling Leah? Was Leah even real? I screamed into my phone, telling my mother, who I had frantically called, that I was on the street, that something was wrong. My mother begged me to get away, to find people, to call for help. As I spoke, the woman finally stepped out of the car, walking toward me. I shouted that I was already on the phone with the police, even though I wasn't. That seemed to stop her. She froze, her smile gone. Then, without a word, she turned back, threw my suitcase onto the pavement, and sped away. The sound of her tires against the concrete echoed in my ears long after she vanished. Shaking, I dragged my suitcase and walked until I found someone willing to help me reach a friend's home. My friend's family took me in, calmed me down, and helped me report everything to the police. What I learned afterwards still makes me shiver. There was no registered au pair family under Leah's name. The number she had used was prepaid and untraceable. The photos she had sent me of her children were stolen from the internet. Leah had never existed. Every detail, every word, had been a fabrication designed to lure me into a trap. The police told me I had likely been seconds away from being trafficked. The realization broke me. I had spent every penny I had on that flight. I had trusted strangers on the internet to guide me towards safety, and instead, I had almost been swallowed whole by something sinister. For weeks, I barely slept, replaying the moment the car veered into that industrial area, the sound of the woman's voice on the phone, the look in her eyes when I jumped out. If I had hesitated even a few more minutes, I might not be here to tell the story. Eventually, I returned to Canada, scarred but alive. Later, determined not to give up, I applied again through a verified agency, vowing never to risk my safety on shortcuts again. I now know how close I came to disappearing. What was supposed to be my dream nearly became a nightmare. I could not escape. And sometimes when I lie awake at night, I wonder how many others weren't so lucky. How many girls got into cars like that and never found their way out again. Every dream carries its shadow. And for au pairs, the shadow can be darker than anyone expects. On the surface, the idea is simple. A young person travels abroad, becomes part of a family, learns a culture, and gains an unforgettable experience. Agencies advertise it as a safe exchange of childcare for room and board, a gateway to adventure. But hidden underneath the glossy brochures and smiling family photos is a world where vulnerability is easily exploited. The stories of Brandon, Sebi, and Leah are not isolated nightmares. They are warnings. In each case, the young women went abroad filled with hope. They sought independence, self-discovery, and a chance to build lives beyond the narrow borders of their childhood towns. They stepped into foreign homes and trusted strangers because the structure of the program promised security. Yet the reality was far more sinister. For the girl from France, it wasn't the parents or the location that posed the threat. It was a child, a boy of 9, whose cruelty went unnoticed and unchecked. Brandon wasn't just mischievous. He was calculating, manipulative, and dangerous. His actions escalated from lies to sadism, and his parents' refusal to confront the truth allowed him to destroy a young woman's livelihood. What should have been a year of laughter and growth ended in fear and despair, leaving behind scars that time alone cannot erase. The German girl's story revealed another form of danger, the predator hiding in plain sight. Sebi presented himself as cultured, charming, and attentive, qualities any young woman might find attractive. But behind his smile was obsession. His stalking wasn't a sudden impulse. It was systematic, built from months of surveillance, stolen information, and psychological manipulation. He wove a web around her so carefully that at first she mistook it for romance. By the time she uncovered the truth, his claws were already deep in her life. The danger wasn't theoretical. It sat across from her at dinner, held her hand on walks, and whispered sweet words while planning possession. Few people understand how terrifying it is to realize someone has cataloged your existence, turned your life into an archive to study and control. Sebi was proof that sometimes the monster is not the stranger in the shadows, but the person who looks you in the eyes and pretends to care. The Canadian girl's story exposes perhaps the darkest truth of all. Human trafficking thrives on vulnerability. Her desire to travel, to belong, to find family in a foreign land made her a perfect target. The Leah who lured her in was never real. The warmth of her messages, the photographs of children, the affectionate nicknames all stolen, all fabricated to build trust. What awaited at the airport was not a mother with open arms, but a stranger with a smile as thin as glass. The route into the industrial district was no accident. The evasive answers were not clumsy, but deliberate. This was a plan, honed and rehearsed, meant to funnel her into disappearance. That she escaped was due not to luck alone, but to instinct, courage, and the refusal to stay silent in the face of danger. Yet her trauma is a reminder that for every escape, there are countless others who never get the chance. When we put these 3 stories side by side, patterns emerge. Each au pair was young, far from home, eager to please, and largely without support. In those conditions, predators thrive. Whether it is a child testing the boundaries of cruelty, a manipulator feeding his obsession, or traffickers weaving traps, the vulnerability is the same. The very structure of the au pair system living in someone else's home, relying on their goodwill, navigating a culture you don't fully understand, creates fertile ground for exploitation. And often, those who should protect you either cannot or will not. The Joseph parents chose denial over truth. The authorities might dismiss stalking as paranoia. Agencies, when used at all, often prioritize placement over safety. The psychological toll is immense. These women did not simply experience fear in the moment. They carried it with them long after. The French au pair fell into depression, haunted by a child's malevolence. The German au pair learned that intimacy can be weaponized, that privacy once lost can never be reclaimed. The Canadian au pair faced the crushing knowledge that she had walked to the edge of a trap designed to erase her completely. Each of them left their experiences forever changed, forced to see the world not as a place of adventure, but as a landscape where danger hides in ordinary faces. Yet their voices matter. By telling their stories, they warn others. They remind us that danger doesn't always announce itself with violence. Sometimes it whispers, smiles, or hides behind innocence. They show us that instinct should never be ignored, that feeling something is wrong is not paranoia, but survival. They prove that bravery is not always about fighting back. It is about leaving, running, refusing to be silent when everything tells you to keep the peace. The dark side of the au pair dream is not the end of the story. With stronger regulations, verified agencies, and a willingness to listen to au pairs when they raise concerns, tragedies can be prevented. Parents must face uncomfortable truths about their children. Authorities must treat stalking and trafficking as the urgent threats they are. And young people seeking these opportunities must be taught not just how to care for children, but how to protect themselves. Because behind the glossy promise of cultural exchange lies a question too many ignore. What is the price of trust? For some, the cost is only loneliness or homesickness. For others, it is the destruction of dreams, the loss of safety, or the shadow of death narrowly escaped. These stories are not entertainment alone. They are lessons carved from fear, survival, and the reality that innocence can be deadly when it blinds us to danger. The dream of being an au pair may still shine, but no one should step into it without knowing the risks that lurk in the shadows. When we look back at these three stories, a chilling pattern emerges. Each young woman left home with hope in her heart, eager to experience life abroad, only to be confronted by darkness she never expected. The French au pair discovered that evil can grow inside a child's smile, manifesting in lies, cruelty, and violence that destroyed her life. The German au pair learned that obsession can wear the mask of romance, that someone who seems attentive and loving can in reality be studying her every move, waiting for the moment to claim ownership. And the Canadian au pair found herself only seconds away from being swallowed into the machinery of human trafficking, lured not by brute force, but by carefully woven lies designed to make her trust. What ties these experiences together is vulnerability. To be an au pair is to place yourself in the hands of strangers, to live in their homes, care for their children, and depend on them for shelter and support. It is a leap of faith that most families honor with kindness, but not all. For predators, it is an opportunity. They look for youth, for naivety, for people who are far from home with little protection. And when they find them, the consequences can be devastating. The lessons are clear. First, instincts matter. Each of these women felt something was wrong before the worst happened. Ignoring those instincts would have led to greater harm. Second, preparation and verification are essential. Using trusted agencies, double-checking identities, and ensuring there is a safety net can mean the difference between adventure and nightmare. And third, society must listen when au pairs raise concerns. Too often, their voices are dismissed as exaggeration or immaturity, but behind their words may be the very warnings that could save lives. For anyone considering becoming an au pair, the dream is still real, but it must be approached with eyes open. Safety must come before excitement. Caution must walk hand in hand with curiosity. And every young person who travels abroad must know that it is not weakness to leave a dangerous situation, but strength. Survival is not about enduring abuse, it is about refusing to accept it. These stories are not simply entertainment. They are warnings written in fear, survival, and resilience. They remind us that the world is not always safe, that trust is precious and dangerous when misplaced. If you take one thing from these stories, let it be this: your instincts are your strongest ally. When something feels wrong, believe it. When danger whispers, do not wait for it to scream. This is the reality behind the smiling faces and cozy promises. This is the price paid by those who dared to trust too much. And if you want to hear more of these true, disturbing story tales that remind us of the darkness hidden in ordinary places, subscribe now to The Price Paid. Because knowing the truth could be the only thing that keeps you safe.